Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Josh Williams and I'm joined by Mo Stewart. Mo, welcome back to the show, mate.
Thanks, man. It's good to be back. I'm liking this now. I feel a little more settled in now. Like Darwin, I've had a few runs and now I'm starting to hit my stride.
Yeah, well, it's getting noticed when you're absent, mate. To be honest, I saw a few of the comments asking for your return. So yeah,
Well,
we've
I have to say, Dan was very kind about me in my absence, so I have to thank him for that if he's watching.
yeah. It was nice to get a special guest on. But back to normality this week, back to regular appearances. And I thought it was going to be a quiet week. I thought it was going to be relatively straightforward. Liverpool have got a League Cup game against a League One side, and then a relatively nice home fixture to end the Premier League before the World Cup against the Saints. But on Monday, a storm hit. Fenway Sports Group reportedly considering a sale when it comes to Liverpool, for those who aren't aware. Whether that be a percentage to investors or whether it be a full sale, depending on who on earth can come up with that sort of money. But it kind of come out of nowhere, really. And I haven't yet gave my opinion on this. I haven't tweeted anything about this, so I'm going to use the podcast for that. And same goes for Mo. So, I mean, where should we start, Mo? What were your initial thoughts on what came out?
My initial thoughts were like you. It was a bit of a shock because you didn't get a sense that this was coming. But the more I thought about it, the more you can start to see the reasoning behind the timing. But it's a lot to unpack, essentially. Like, this cuts to the very heart of the club. Who is in charge? Who is going to be making decisions from here on in? And the difference between what we believe and what is being said is also very important. Like you say, there's lots of stuff from David Ornstein who broke the story saying Liverpool are up for sale. They've already started putting together packages for other people to come and look at it. But all the messaging from those inside the club, whether it be the FSG statement or the stuff that said both Pep and Klopp have said, it's all about looking to find new investors, finding new money. Essentially, what they're saying is we need another way to compete with Manchester City, and not just Manchester City, by the way. I believe Newcastle coming to the party has precipitated some of this as well. So, like I say, it's fundamental from top to bottom, an important subject that is going to affect everything and needs to be treated as such with the kind of time and delicacy that such a massive thing denotes. One thing you did say about who could afford, it's not going to be one person. I think it might end up being a group of people. And that's where the interesting thing comes in, because how are they going to agree? Are they going to agree? Is it going to be another Hicks and Gillette type scenario? That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a sensitive one. There's a lot we can cover on this, and there's we can speculate and things like that. But I want to kind of avoid that sort of thing for now, at least. And I want to touch on. I don't know. I suppose the analysing Anfield elements of FSG, and why. I don't know, just the analysing Anfield perspective on FSG, if you like. But I think before we even do that, what are your thoughts on the FSG ownership, Mo? What's your stance on the owners?
So, taking into account everything from where the club was when they arrived to where we are now and what they've achieved in that time and the decisions made in that time, I'm giving them a solid 8 out of 10. I think when you look at the big bullet points, Liverpool have won every trophy that there is to win. So there's been success on the pitch. They've solved to a large extent a massive problem of the stadium, which was running through multiple different ownerships. They've managed to upgrade it and are still upgrading it. They've brought in a fantastic manager who potentially has been the backbone of success and will be able to potentially create success when he goes, as well as a legacy. So all of those things work well in their favor. Have they been perfect? Absolutely not. Is there more that they could have done to make us even better? Yes, I think so. But I have to look at the full scale. When you're thinking about owners, it's not just about what you want them to be, it's what you don't want them to be. And as much as there's been complaints about how sensible they've been with the business and not taking risks at certain times, That's allowed Liverpool to be solvent and in a good position and an attractive club. Because as much as it's going to be a high price to buy them, I still believe there's going to be lots of people who are going to want to do it because of all those things I just mentioned. We are an attractive proposition, and we have a ridiculously strong fan base that will buy anything and everything to do with Liverpool for the years to come. So, from that perspective, I say that they are being good. I'll say that the new owners have to have a lot of the same qualities that they have. But the question is, do we have any say in that? Do we have the ability to have an influence on what kind of owners we're going to get? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I think you make a good point there when it comes to, how attractive a proposition Liverpool currently are at the minute to potential investors. And I think that pretty much epitomizes the FSG ownership for me. If you look at Liverpool as an investment opportunity, you have a newly renovated stadium essentially that's just been kind of maximized in terms of its capacity. You have an elite top 2 coaches in the world in charge who has just signed a new deal to take him for another 4 years at least. The supporters couldn't be more on side with that man. His entire backroom staff are also tied down. The best players at the club, including the best player or the most valuable player at least, is tied down for the next couple of years. There's a few new signings that have come in of late, past couple of windows who are youthful and going to be that next generation. Liverpool almost won a quadruple 5 months ago. So if you look at the landscape as a whole, Liverpool are obviously a very attractive proposition, and that stems from the way the club has been run for the past decade or so. The issue I have, this is a common hate that I have when it comes to football and the Premier League and all that stuff. The first thought of the man on the street when it comes to owners is money. That's the first thought immediately. How deep are this guy's pockets, right? And I suppose I was almost one of those before FSG. And I think since FSG, I've kind of realised that it's just as important for an owner or an ownership group or whatever to offer expertise and nous as much as it is for them to offer funding, essentially. Over the years, the expertise that they've provided on Merseyside, from a distance, obviously, based on what they have picked up knowledge-wise in baseball, has really, really helped Liverpool. And if you look at some other owners across the Premier League alone, some of them have pumped a lot of money into the club, thrown all kinds of money at the transfer market, and in some cases they went backwards, and that's because they simply haven't got a clue, and they've employed people who also don't really have much of a clue, and they haven't got the right structure in place, and they went backwards. And Liverpool have been able to compete, as I said, just almost won a quadruple 5 months ago, despite this spend, because of the expertise behind the scenes, because of the experts at the club. Klopp was an FSG appointment. Julian Ward was an FSG appointment. Mike Edwards, Ian Graham, Damien Comolli back in the day. All FSG appointments, all experts appointed by FSG. So that's my big thing with owners. It's about far more than how much money are we getting in the transfer budget. It's about a lot more than that for me.
No, 100% agree. I think it's funny you were saying about examples all across the Premier League. The biggest example I thought of was across the park with Everton, because I mean, you've seen what they've done whenever they've had money. It's not necessarily made them better. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And the thing about having the nous and having that the ability to learn from other sports is that they knew that they were in a position leaders in the field of football. They came in as knowing about sports teams, but they didn't know about the specifics of football. And there's been times when that's tripped them up. But the thing about them is they, for the most part, seem to have learned from those times and evolved and taken on the messages from the mistakes, so to speak. And that's something that you really don't see a lot of time with owners, because frankly, who own football clubs or own big institutions are normally rich. And to be honest, a lot of the time, kind of pig-headed because they're used to being right, or at least being surrounded by people who tell them they're right. And then when sometimes those kind of people come into this and they are proven to be wrong, unequivocally proven to be wrong, they don't know how to deal with it. Thankfully, our owners currently aren't like that. But again, this is what I'm saying. There's no guarantee that the next ones won't be.
Yeah, well, when you think about these potential owners and the owners of a lot of clubs across Europe, they have so much money compared to the average man that it does get to a point where it's almost more money than sense, really. And you see that in a lot of the transfer activity in particular. You used Everton as an example. I think that's absolutely relevant. Over the past 5 seasons or so since Mashiri took charge, they've dedicated like extortionate fees for the likes of Michael Keane and Yannick Bolasie, Jen Tosun, Gylfi Sigurdsson, just all right average Premier League players who are going to do nothing for your goal difference, nothing for your points tally. And as I said, they've went backwards. They've employed multiple different coaches, a few different sporting directors, one of which was overruled a fair bit. Lots of different styles of play and people leading that style of play, and it's been a shambles. And if you look at when you said across the park, I thought you could have equally meant Manchester United, to be honest. Because if you look at Old Trafford, again they've thrown £1 billion at the transfer market since they last won a Premier League, and their current state right now, not even close. Honestly, they're miles away. And on top of that, the stadium's crumbling to bits. And say, for example, the whole data thing that we talk about, that FSG integrated from their time in Boston in baseball. It was an idea that John Henry had immediately when he got to Merseyside, and it was kind of like integrated pretty quickly. Damien Comolli came in because of his data-driven background a little bit, and he brought Michael Edwards with him. Michael Edwards kind of bridged the gap with Ian Graham. Ian Graham comes in, and Liverpool set up their data science department. I think it was 2012. Manchester United have just appointed an equivalent version of Ian Graham 13 months ago, I think it was. So, that's what, 9 years behind Liverpool when it comes to the data science department. Data is like such a modern thing now. Again, the Glazers, when it comes to running a sporting institution, don't have a clue, and it's clear.
The funniest thing about that as well is that when John Henry was thinking about getting involved with Liverpool, the Glazers were one of the people who he consulted with because, again, he knows them through sports ownership. They all drink in the same big, massive tables, I assume. And so the Glazers were telling them all about the way that they were doing it. And John Henry was diligently going, oh, yes, 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 yes. And then he did none of it. He did none of it. and yet, I mean, it's not just in terms of that analytics side, but if you look at the way that it's been financed, obviously Manchester United, it's very easy to forget when they're spending £1 billion on transfers that they're also leveraging so much debt on the club. Yeah. And the Glazers themselves have taken so much money out of that club. And there's a difference between increasing the value so you get your money when the sale happens, and then literally giving yourself a salary out of their success, which is going to have to pay back at some point in the future. So it's really interesting the way that, like I said, they've been able to take on things from other people and work out what works and what doesn't work and do the best for that. And I'm hoping that that's going to continue with this stage, because if they do look for a sale, which I do still think personally that finding new investments, whether it's a limited partner deal, which we have a lot of recently, or something like that, I still think that's probably going to be their plan A rather than actual sale. But I do think that when that eventual sale comes, they'll probably still want to retain a stake in the club because it's still going to be profitable. And so that means they're going to have to care a lot more about who the next owners are, which might in turn help us who also care for maybe different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, you referenced Hicks and Gillette earlier. We're not supposed to swear on this podcast, but but if you look back right at Hicks and Gillette, the last window that Liverpool had under that ownership. I mean, I've just been talking about cash and expertise. You can almost separate those. Does the owner offer cash? Does he offer expertise? Does he offer both? Does he offer neither? It feels like a neither when it comes to Hicks and Gillette, because if you look at the last window that Liverpool had, right, this is the players Liverpool bought in that last window. Raul Morales, it gets worse from here. Christian Poulsen, Paul Konchesky, Brad Jones, Danny Wilson, John Joe Shelby, Milan Jovanovic, Joe Cole. and a lot of those players, by the way, are over the hill. A lot of those players have been let go by a Juventus or a Chelsea because they're like 29 or picking up injury problems or whatever. So those are the days where Liverpool are utterly clueless, when it comes to not even having much money, and on top of that, just having zero expertise whatsoever. Liverpool right now are regarded as one of the smartest clubs in the world. They're regarded as pioneers in the data sphere, and that stems from the decisions made from FSG since the start, really. Obviously, the people that they've integrated have helped with that, and have benefited from the advice of Klopp, I'm assuming, and things like that, and Edwards and stuff like that. But over time, it comes back to that expertise. And when I'm talking about money isn't everything, a lot of people will probably immediately think, well, what about Manchester City? Because obviously, City have dominated the Premier League for the past decade, really. They're currently dominating now. They look as healthy as ever. So with City, obviously they have the funds. That's clear. But I think with time as well, they've also merged in the expertise, which is the problem, and that's why they've got such dominance. They got the fellas in from Barcelona, didn't they? Bergerstein, is it?
Yeah,
Difficult to pronounce.
Beginnerstein.
Yeah, and then they ended up pairing him up with Guardiola. And if you look at the last time they were a pair, you've got arguably the greatest club side in history in that Barcelona team. So that's why City is so dominant right now, because they've merged the funds with the expertise at the minute. Yes. Whether that will still be the case when Guardiola gets replaced by a standard coach, which every coach is really in comparison to Pep, City's dominance might drop off a little bit, but that's why City is so dominant. It's not purely the money, because Manchester United have had the same money. It's City's expertise, City's vision, City's identity that Man United have been lacking. And Liverpool have had the expertise under FSG. That's kind of what I'm getting at. And it's something that, with a sale being toyed now, it's a worry of mine that the next people in charge, will they have that same degree of expertise? If they have the funds, will they be able to bridge the gap with the funds because they don't have the expertise? You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, and again, there's no way of guaranteeing that from our perspective, unless this is what I was saying before about FSG retaining some kind of stake or role may well not be beneficial, because if that is the case, then obviously any new owners are obviously going to lean on them in terms of infrastructure and ideas, even if it's just initially. So there's that. That's the only really way to guarantee that. You've obviously got the bidding process where everyone goes through and puts in their stuff, but we've already seen, I mean, I was reading an article earlier today that said that there's already been 3 or 4 potential bidders come in from Dubai, but as soon as anyone was asked to show actual hard cash and the ability to produce it at the right time, then those inquiries seem to went away. There might be a few cowboys, a few jokers who try to kind of find their way in just to sign a non-disclosure just to have a look and not really be serious owners. So it might be a process that takes a long time. But as I said at the top of the show, it's that important. It probably needs to take a long time. So unlike with Chelsea, they basically were on the clock because of what happened with Roman Abramovich. This is a scenario where, like you say, so much stability is in the club in terms of the playing staff, in terms of the management coaching staff, to be able to find the right people who will be able to go through all the rigorous testing to find out exactly what they can do, what they want to do, and what they won't do, which I think is probably equally as important.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the the funds that are being talked about for this purchase, you're looking upwards of 4 billion really.
Mhm.
And as you say, in terms of who can afford that, you're either looking at a state really or a group. The idea of a group makes me a bit nervous because sometimes, like we saw with Hicks and Gillette, that if they don't get on, if they don't particularly like each other, what happens then? You know, it just kind of falls down then. Obviously, Chelsea are being purchased by a group led by Todd Bowley, which has started off rocky a little bit. And I disagree with a lot of the transfer business have done, but by all accounts, Todd Bowley is very, very smart. And apparently, he is very much a data-driven, smart kind of operator in the American sports. And I think it's interesting that Chelsea are have made a series of appointments already behind the scenes. I think they've chased a couple of Red Bull guys. They've chased a fella from, I think, Bayer Leverkusen, is it maybe? I'm not sure. I don't know the names off the top of my head. They got the head of recruitment from Southampton in. Obviously, they've replaced Tuchel with Potter. So it's a lot of transition there at the minute. But I knowing what Bowley's like, I wouldn't be that surprised if further down the line, Chelsea start to look really good. But I'm not sure how long that will take. But at least in that sense, Chelsea have an operator there who has proved his ability to kind of lead the sporting operation through, efficiency and good decisions and things like that. And my big fear with Liverpool is just, selling to the highest bidder, and that the eventual owner or owners don't really have a clue what to do or how to win. It's tricky. That's why it's scary.
It is scary. One thing I would say that the trend at the moment that I've noticed is that most of the new owners coming into football tend to be from America. So, I mean, obviously, our owners are already American, but 4 of the last 7 Premier League clubs to be taken over were taken over by Americans. So, when it comes to rather than looking at the nation states, looking at the consortiums, the groups of billionaires, at the moment, they tend to be Americans. And in some ways that's good because they're more likely to have experience of owning sports teams, because if you think about in America, they've got the 4 major sports, but they've also got MLS, which is an emerging brand. And I've noticed there's a trend at the moment. There are quite a few sports teams in America up for sale, like for different reasons. Some, the current owners have been exposed as being bad people. Some of them, there are lots of different reasons, basically. But the interesting thing about that is demand has gone up, but that doesn't mean that prices have gone down. Prices are still going up because people still realize that these are still assets that are going to increase. So there's going to be enough different people, I believe, interested to be able to find someone with the best qualities of anyone. Because essentially, Liverpool and FSG have got the time to do this. We talked about the stability they've got on the coaching staff, the stability they've got within the team. And then you add into the fact of that they're not being put under pressure in a way. There's not an Abramovich situation, which means that there's a deadline for when they have to do this. They can take as long as they want. So that buys into Liverpool's favour as well about finding the best possible people. And everything we've said about their expertise, their ability to listen to the right people and do most of the right things tells me that hopefully that should be an advantage as well.
Yeah, I mean, on top of the expertise that they've offered, obviously it hasn't really been a case of Liverpool haven't spent at all. Liverpool, let's not forget, have broken the world record for a defender and the world record for a goalkeeper. Under FSG in the past couple of years. Obviously, it stemmed from Felipe Coutinho's sale. But we seem to be in the market for Jude Bellingham, who's going to cost about 200 million. We were rivaling Real Madrid for Adelan Tchouameni. So it's not like Liverpool haven't been able to compete, and it's not like Liverpool haven't been going for these players. It's just a case of, in terms of the absolute top whack, like a Haaland or an Mbappe or a player like that, it's maybe been more efficient almost to go elsewhere, or more realistic to go elsewhere in some cases. But yeah, overall, it's an interesting thing that I think more people need to consider. Basically, just alongside the fun, alongside the money. How do we run this sport institution? I think if you look at Newcastle, for example, under Saudi ownership, I think one thing they've certainly got right is straight away I think their first appointment was Dan Ashworth,
Yep.
as a sporting director. Obviously, plenty of experience, just being in charge of Brighton, who are one of the smartest in Europe, in my opinion. They've got an Eddie Howe, and rather than just throwing money, all over the place, he seems to have actually listened to what the squad needs, and there's a lot of sense behind what they're doing there. So I think that's why they're climbing. That's why they're doing really well. But as I said, my worry would just be if we was to get in an ownership group that have got more money than sense, really. And another thing I wanted to touch on as well is I think Liverpool massively benefit from the contingency plan that is put in place by FSG. For example, when Edwards left, his ready-made replacement was right there in Julian Ward, and it's been touted that when Klopp leaves, arguably his ready-made replacement could be right there in Pep Linders and things like that. And I would that would be another thing that we could potentially lose if FSG was to leave, because FSG are kind of putting that in place, really, where Barcelona had that at one point, where I think Pep was in charge, and then Pep got replaced by was it Villanova?
Yeah.
Tito Villanova, yeah. And you kind of had that consistent path, really, where it's you're retaining the same values, building on the same identity and things like that. And if you change ownership group, that would be a bit of a worry of mine, and another one of my worries, I suppose.
Trust me, we've all got loads of them, don't worry. But I mean, in terms of that kind of development from within, I mean, who's more famous than us? We basically had 4 managers from the same room that spanned about 60 years, was it? So there's definitely something within our history there, and any new people coming in would probably be aware of that as well. But you're right, when you're trying to look at it from the business perspective, that stability that we have as a club is an asset. But when you're someone new, particularly trying to make yourself stand out from a large group of people, prospective buyers, maybe there will be some of these prospective bidders who will be mouthing off in the press and saying, when I come in, I'll buy Mbappe, I'll buy Haaland, I'll do this, I'll do that, and try to get as well as ground support on side from fans who are, like you say, only looking at the money. The problem with that, though, is, like you say, the people who are more likely to try and use that as a tool are the more likely to be, let's say, somewhat loose with that money, because the hidden truth about big deals, everybody wants the club to sign the biggest players, the biggest deals, etc., etc. The percentage of the biggest deals that work out is very small. So you look at Haaland at Man City and think, oh, Liverpool should have been able to do that. You look at Tchouaméni and you think, oh, Liverpool should have been able to do that. You forget about Eden Hazard, who was an absolute disaster. And there's countless others. I mean, technically, are Barcelona still paying us money for Phil Coutinho? I think I read that somewhere the other day. They're still paying us. They're going to be paying it when he's a pundit for NFC TV. So you have to be careful what you wish for. I think that's going to be a phrase you hear a lot with all these talks. But in terms of, oh, that's what we're missing, someone to come in and do the big deals, it's not always the case. Like you said with Newcastle, they built their foundation first. I think Isak was the only one they spent a large amount of money on, and he's an investment. He's a young player who's potentially going to be there for a long period of time and get that money back. So the thing that we've said all along, it's not just about having the money, it's about what you do with it. And hopefully the people who are coming in, prospective buyers, will show their hand enough that we'll be able to gauge what kind of owners there will be and choose accordingly.
Yeah, well, you mentioned Barcelona there. Barcelona have one of the world-leading departments when it comes to data. I think it's called the Innovation Hub in Barcelona, and it's as I said, it's world-leading. But over the years, we know Barcelona have made horrendous decisions in the transfer market, buying the wrong players for too much money, and it resulted in the best player ever having to give a press conference in tears because he was getting forced out of the club. And that stems from, okay, you've got this data, but the guys in charge aren't listening. The guys in charge don't really want to know. And one of the reasons Liverpool have been able to climb to the top over the years is because in addition to fostering this data science department since 2012, crucially, we've had an ownership group that truly believe in the power of data and have allowed data to filter through the fabric of the club. That's why Liverpool are leaders in the field. So again, I'm really keen to highlight why these owners are so good and so rare in a sporting sense, in like a performance sense, because I think the initial reaction when the news came out was that, alongside surprise, I saw more people happy than sad about it, and it does feel like be careful what you wish for kind of stuff to me.
No, very much so. And again, I think those are the people who were complaining about missing out on those big deals I mentioned earlier. I mean, the FSG out hashtag has been trending for a couple of months, and not just because Liverpool have been playing terrible football. And you look at the frustration of being so close to being able to have a drastically bigger trophy cabinet. If you think of the missed chances to Man City, the 2 in the league, and then obviously the Champions League last season. So being so close, and then you think maybe just a little bit more, and you're obsessed with what you didn't do to get there, rather than thinking about all of the things you did right to get that close. And there's more of them than there is of that. But again, I feel like to a certain extent that's human nature. Once we get into the actual nuts and bolts of trying to find a new owner and people coming up and making themselves known and finding out what this guy's about, what this group are about, what this country could be about, that's when the real value of what we've got will come into play for most people, I think. But there's no guarantee that, as I said at the top, that this is going to be an initial sale very soon. I think this is going to be a process that takes a long time. It might even begin with limited partnerships. And in terms of what we was talking about, in terms of smooth transitions, that might be the way forward. You look at the way it's worked with Redbird Capital and the percentages that they've been able to add bit on bit. Maybe you look at a new investor coming in, a limited partnership, maybe give them a 10, 12, 25%. And they kind of get their feet under the table and realize what it is to be involved in Liverpool Football Club. And then they just look to eventually extend their majority over time, and the FSG will over time move into the background. That makes sense, but unfortunately, I'm not a business expert, so there's probably a really good reason why that won't happen that I'm not aware of.
Well, I think for me, early on, so far, I feel like I would much prefer investors as opposed to a full sale, personally. One of the reasons for that, you just touched on there, the kind of how close Liverpool have came over the years to kind of a real era of a golden dominance generation, really, if you know what I mean. Golden era. I think Liverpool have had that to an extent, but it could have been like another 2 Premier Leagues maybe, or another Champions League as well, or something like that. But regardless, anyway, Liverpool have had, in my opinion, what has been an era of dominance, really. We've got to something like, I don't know, 4 European finals, 5 European finals, or whatever it's been under Klopp. Over 90 points in the Premier League, I think, on 3 separate occasions. So it's been a really healthy period for the club, obviously. And I think the reason behind that, and one of the reasons behind why I've been so confident that Liverpool are going to keep dominating for years to come, has been that it's been a combination of FSG, Mike Gordon, Jurgen Klopp, Michael Edwards, Pep Linders, like 1 or 2 of the scouts like Dave Fallows, Barry Hunter, and Ian Graham. I think that without Julian Ward as well, without leaving out some other names who deserve credit, it's kind of been a combination of that. Yeah. What I would be worried about is if this sale was to go through, then it'd be a case of, in a really short period, really, we would have lost Edwards, being replaced by Ward. We'd have lost Mike Gordon, who is obviously FSG's man for Liverpool, so he would no longer be there. We'd lose the owners who have fostered this data-driven, smart culture type thing, Moneyball, whatever you want to call it. And in 2076, we could potentially lose Klopp as well. So for me, that's too much upheaval for the regime delivered all the dominance, the regime that delivered the golden era, if you like. So again, that would be another concern of mine. Just that dominant period that Liverpool had with all these figures in charge. It just feels like a lot of them would quickly disappear if this was to go through but by in the next couple of years, and it could easily. I don't think it would happen this simply, but it could easily result in Liverpool going back to what they were, which was fifth, fourth every year.
Well, I mean, the other thing about that as well is that that in itself is not just dependent on Liverpool, because whether Liverpool get it right or get it wrong, there are other clubs who are making those same decisions who are getting it right. Obviously, Arsenal have got something in place that looks like they're ready to start building. We've already spoken about Newcastle, who look like they're going to be able to be a stronger force. And the simple fact is that whether they are smart or not, Manchester City, Chelsea, and Manchester United will still be able to have money. So they're always going to be competitive. Spurs may be the outlier. We'll have to wait and see what goes to them. So it could be that Liverpool just stay still rather than drop, but that they still end up dropping because everyone else has risen. So there is, again, so much to contend with every time you try to make a seismic change. And I'm like you. I think that to try and do it at all in one go like that could end up being a bit of an issue, because you could be in a situation where Klopp is, aside from having to manage the team, is also having to manage those above him who don't necessarily know. Because if you're a new owner and you're coming into a situation and there is a dearth of experience around the club, you're going to lean on the guy who knows his things. And as much as Jurgen would obviously want to help, he's probably got better things to be doing with his time for the most part. So part of his brilliance has been, like you said, the collaboration. So you'd hope that they would be able to have more than just him. Maybe Julian Moore's still going to be there at the time. But these are other things that we have to consider for sure.
Yeah, well, that example is relevant in Chelsea's case, actually, because I think apparently one of the reasons why there was conflict between Thomas Tuchel and Todd Bowley is because obviously Bowley doesn't have much experience in football, and he was suggesting Cristiano Ronaldo to Tuchel, and Tuchel was kind of responding no in a bit of a in quite a blunt way, and rather than just kind of taking no, Bowley kind of wanted to know why and things like that, and apparently that happened a few times, if you like, and it resulted in a bit of conflict there. But yeah, I agree. I think it's important to let Klopp do what he's good at, essentially. And that's the case for everyone really across the board. And I just think that a lot of the time when it comes to football, the most stable institution is the institution that rises and that evolves and improves, and it's the ones that have to manage this constant transition, constant upheaval, whether it be a change in squad players a lot, or ownership, or sporting directors, or managers. Manchester United a good example. Everton good example. It never really benefits anyone really, that period, and you can't fall quite low. But I wanted to touch on just one final point then, in terms of, I've seen a few people say that FSG have taken Liverpool as far as they can, and that since Liverpool have reached the pinnacle, the Moneyball model hasn't really translated. What are your thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one, because essentially Moneyball as a technique is meant to be someone who punches above their weight, or to get a higher value and efficiency from things that you wouldn't necessarily get. So when you are no longer an underdog, it's a very different market, because even it's harder to find bargains, because anyone who you buy from, they're going to be like, well, you're Liverpool, you're one of the biggest clubs in the world. If you want our player, then you're going to have to pay for them. And so it becomes a little bit harder to find that value within it. In terms of, have they gone as far as they can go? There's been lots of talk about how when they came in initially, they were leaning heavily on FFP, and on thinking that was going to be able to help them level the playing field.
Yeah.
Then there was the European Super League. Then there was Project Big Picture, or whatever the hell it was called. They've always tried to find different ways to catch up.
Yeah.
Now, whether you look at this now and they say, well, the fact that they're looking at leaving is saying, well, no, they decided there isn't a way and they are going to have to leave now, or whether you look at the investment angle and say, this is just their latest method of trying. So I don't think it's set in stone that this is them absolutely checking out. But I do tend to agree with the problems of using that system at this level, because it becomes a point where once you're already at a high level, to keep it ticking over, you've got to be able to still introduce good new players, but also maintain the stability and the chemistry of those before. And time is always going to make that more difficult. So there's lots to deal with. There really is lots to deal with. It's a good thing. It's why you and I do this job and not that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually. It's a difficult one to assess that whether Liverpool have outgrown FSG or not. I mean, if you look at since Liverpool won the Premier League, Liverpool have persisted with making some of these signings, and some of them have been in the mold of what came before. Like since we won the Premier League, we have signed Diogo Jota, we've signed Ibrahima Konate, Luis Diaz, Darwin Núñez, Kostas Tsimikas. So, in my opinion, those have all been good signings. Obviously, it's a bit early to judge Núñez, but he looks good to me. He looks like he's going to be potentially great if he actually does fulfill his potential. So I think it is doable. But I suppose to an extent, Liverpool have had to sell Sadio Mane to get Núñez in a way. So I don't know. I'm not really too sure on where I stand on that. But I don't think. I think the whole idea of what Moneyball is, where you sell high and buy low, is. I mean, it's in my opinion, it's kind of practiced at Real Madrid. You know, and they're regarded as the ultimate alpha club who are certainly not Moneyball in anyone's eyes. But if you look at this summer, for example, they sold Casemiro, 60 odd million, brought in Tchouaméni, younger model, who is just, you know, the next step, if you like. They sold Ronaldo a few years ago for 100 million. And you know, they've brought two likes of Camavinga in. You know, so I think it's an approach that's quite common across Europe, really, doing that.
One thing I'd say about Real Madrid, when you're dealing with people who are a bit stupid, it's a lot easier to look smart. How are you, Man United? So there are times
it's a big shame that Liverpool can't sell to Man United, isn't it?
I know. Honestly, we'd have them lined up. But you're right in terms of the that is pretty much the best way to run a successful football club, however big you are. But the part of the problem is that we've had as well is that the better you are as a team, the harder it is to improve it. So particularly if you are trying to find value signings, the level that you need to go to be an improvement for this side, and we've already seen it in terms of the struggles to find new midfielders. I do think that high bar that we've set in terms of coming into this team has been a part of the reason why we haven't seen the investment we'd like. But what that means is that you find yourself in a situation where it's all or nothing with certain things. So when it isn't Tchouaméni, it tends to be nothing. And is that a healthy model to continue with, or do you need to be able to have more contingency plans?
Yeah, well, even the midfielders thing, like people would be inclined to blame FSG for that. You know, we need the money for the midfielder type thing. But initially, the word early in the summer was that once we missed out on Tchouaméni, Klopp deliberately wanted to place his faith in the likes of, you know, Milner and Henderson, and maybe he needed to be told. But that how much of that is down to Fenway, and how much of that is down to Klopp? So it's always been a collaborative model, really, at Liverpool, and I don't know. It's a tricky one, but we were going to speak about Derby briefly. We were going to speak about Southampton as well, previewing that one. But I think we'll probably just kind of leave this as the FSG episode, really. I don't think it'll be the last time we'll speak about this. And if more interested parties if interest becomes concrete, maybe we can do a bit of a background on them or whatever. But before we do kind of leave it, Mo, sum up, I suppose, what you would like to happen in an ideal world for yourself.
In an ideal world, would find a group of investors who would be willing to add to the great team and to give the fantastic manager we have the weapons to go on and compete at the highest level. But they wouldn't be necessarily looking to rock the boat of all the things that we're already doing well. That's the key. I want someone, if someone's going to come in, I want them to be able to recognize the good things about what put us in the position that you wanted to buy them, and to keep those things and to add to them. So whoever that is, and I mean, personally, if I could choose anyone, I'd say it'd be a collaboration between maybe Michael Jordan, LeBron James. I'll take some of those. Yeah, get involved. You never know, we might get some free basketball games out of it. But in all seriousness, like I say, I just want someone who understands what they have and knows what they want to do with it. Seems simple, doesn't it?
I think for me, I would be. Yeah, it does. I think for me, I would be pretty similar. I think if in an ideal world, I would probably choose investors, really keeping most things the same at Liverpool, albeit maybe with a bit more, I suppose, financial power to go and spend a bit more than you earn each window. Not so much more, but just the capacity to do that if we want to buy, whoever it may be. And if we're going to get any sort of full sale through, I want Liverpool to remain cutting edge, data driven, efficient, smart, and I would sacrifice a lot of the billions for someone who basically knows what they're doing and someone who knows how to run a sporting institution to a high level and has proven that. So we'll see what happens there in that sense, I suppose. But Mo, thanks for joining us, mate, for what has been a important and quite a serious business kind of episode, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, like you say, this is now our official position on this. So anyone who wants to know, we can just direct them back to the show.
Yeah, it's been a different one. It's been a different kind of episode, but we'll come back to this. And next week, obviously, it will be the first of our World Cup episodes. So, with that in mind, we might use that to do the big transfers episode where me and Mo pick out midfielders to solve Liverpool's ongoing crisis, if you like. So look out for that one. But thanks for tuning in this week, Mo. Thanks for joining us, mate.
No problem. Pleasure as always.
And we'll see you next week.